who are the top 5 DPSs in Genshin Impact? This is probably the most interesting topic to discuss, since DPS characters are the ones that can produce the flashy damage per screenshot and is our way of showing off our accounts. Since the release of both Fontaine and Natlan, there have been multiple new DPSs, of which have definitely power crept the older characters. Today, let me count down my personal top 5 DPSs as of the Natlan 5.3 update. Do note that all of the DPS characters chosen here will be given their best supports and teams in the calculation. The reason being, if a character is good, supports will help them to reach an even higher potential. But a mid character will only become better, but not amazing, with the same supports. Take the Pyro Traveler for example. I can give her this amazing team, but her damage is still subpar compared to our upcoming list. Anyway, without further ado, my name is ChargeCoin and let's begin the video. Navia was released in version 4.3 and is currently the best Geo DPS in the game. This thanks to her high damage elemental skills, of which requires you to gather up to a maximum of 6 crystallized shards to reach the maximum damage possible for her, similar to how a shotgun works. After using her elemental skill, her normal, charged and plunging attacks will also be infused with Geo, letting her continue to deal good damage while waiting for her skills to recharge. Her initial team of Furina, Bennett and Zhongli was already very amazing. Furina and Bennett provide damage buffs and attack boosts respectively, while also providing the elements to trigger crystallized reactions. Zhongli provides shielding, elemental resistance threat on the enemy, the Geo resonance to buff damage, and also helps to trigger additional crystallized reactions more easily. The downside to this team, however, is Navia's inability to use Kazuha's buffing due to her element being Geo. With the release of Celonen, this totally changed. Her new best team swaps out Zhongli for Celonen. She's able to buff Navia's Geo damage and strat Geo elemental resistance due to a kit and the Cinder City artifact set, thereby further increasing Navia's damage output. The reason why Navia is at number 5 and not higher is because her elemental skill does have a long 9-second cooldown, of which you may find is on cooldown more often than not, which may reduce your overall damage, especially if you do not time the 2 shots well to capitalize on the 4-second Geo infusion on her auto attacks. Her damage, while high, is also not as high as the other characters on this list, especially since Geo does not have its damage multiplied by other elements like Pyro does with Cryo, for example. Arlecchino was released in version 4.6 and was the best Pyro DPS in the game until recently. I think you can guess why. Anyway, Arlecchino is on this list due to how strong her Pyro normal attacks are. Those attacks have high multipliers which are translated to high damage numbers, especially when you couple it with elemental reactions. What's more, unlike previous Pyro infusion characters who rely on their elemental skill with a long cooldown, such as Hu Tao and Yoimiya, it is possible for Arlecchino to have almost 100% Pyro infusion uptime if you manage to time the clearance of a Blood Depth directive well when it converts to Blood Depth Dew 5 seconds later, and time her normal attacks well. Her best team still hasn't changed, the team of Yelan, Kazuha and Bennett. Yelan applies Hydro and with a passive, increases Arlecchino's damage up to a maximum of 50% when the elemental burst is activated. Kazuha strats Pyro resistance and buffs Pyro elemental damage, while also helping to keep up the Hydro application from Yelan with his burst. Bennett buffs Arlecchino's attack with his burst and Pyro infusion, and also buffs Pyro damage if you have his Constellation 6 unlocked. However, the newly released Setali has also become a viable option instead of Yelan due to her ability to apply Cryo for 2 times melt reaction damage, shielding, and also a 20% Pyro resistance threat. It's just that she won't deal as much personal damage compared to Yelan. So, whether you use her or Yelan is really up to you. Arlecchino is at number 4, hugely due to a passive. She gains a 40% Pyro damage bonus, but can only be healed by her own burst. As such, it is not recommended to use the best damage buffer, Furina, for her, due to Furina draining Arlecchino's HP, but is not able to restore it through other teammates such as Bennett. Comparing Natlan to Furina, you lose about 25% damage increase assuming both are at C0. Moreover, Arlecchino being unable to heal outside of herself also means that it's better for you to pair her with a shielder like Zhongli or Sitali, especially if you cannot dodge well. That said, her power alone is able to bypass all of the negatives and warrant you to pull for her. Mualani was released in version 5.0 and has only gotten better and better with the release of more characters in Natlan. Mualani's playstyle is quite unconventional in the sense that she has to use her elemental skill to ram opponents to mark them with a shark, which applies no hydro. Once she hits opponents 3 times and gains 3 wave momentums, she can unleash a stronger shark bite. This makes her sound like a single target character, but the kit also allows her to fire shark missiles at opponents marked, also hitting them with the similarly strong hydro damage. Her elemental burst is also just there to deal even more damage to the enemy. Mualani is so good because of how well she's able to make use of the 2 times damage increase vaporized reactions. She ends up dealing very significant hydro damage to enemies inflicted with pyro, and you will find yourself being able to dispatch of them extremely quickly. Her best team used to be the team of Emily, Silonen and Dehya. Emily to apply Dendro, Silonen provides the hydro resistance strat with a kit and hydro damage buff with the Cinder City artifact set. Dehya applies Pyro to trigger burning on the enemies to keep them affected by Pyro for longer. Dehya of course also provides the Pseudo Shield to aid with Mualani's resistance to interruption even more. Her teammates changed with 5.3 to having Pyro Traveler and Mavuika instead of Emily and Dehya. Pyro Traveler can buff Mualani's damage by 15% thanks to their Constellation 1, but also help to apply Pyro more consistently when paired with Mavuika's elemental skill. Mavuika, on top of the Pyro application, can also further boost Mualani's damage by up to 40% with her burst and passive. Mualani is at number 3 because, despite her capability to capitalize on vaporized reactions, it isn't that she can, but rather must. She's literally nothing without the vaporize. Given how her damage basically comes momentarily every few seconds rather than constantly due to her needing to apply the marks of prey, she has to use the vaporize if she wants to deal good damage. Other hydro reactions such as freeze, electrocharge and bloom unfortunately do not deal as much damage for her because they do not multiply the hydro damage dealt. This hence also limits the team comms that she can be in. For instance, she cannot use damage buffers such as Furina and can barely use Natlan as they might steal her vaporized damage instead, which makes her lose out on their support and also the hydro resonance to buff her own HP for more damage. However, thanks to a strong vaporized damage, I would still say that Mualani still deserves to be in the top 3. Neuvillette was released in version 4.2. Being the Hydro Sovereign, it really isn't surprising to see him make the list as possibly the strongest Hydro DPS in the game. His kit revolves around the source water droplets. He's able to produce 3 with his elemental skill and 6 with his elemental burst. He can then absorb 3 of these droplets at a time, instantly, to unleash a powerful charged AoE Hydro attack which is fast and effective against single or multiple groups of enemies at once. Unlike Mualani, Neuvillette's teams are definitely more flexible. He can fill multiple roles. He can be in a Dendro team, a Melt team, or a Vaporized team if you so desire. His best team, however, in my opinion, has got to be with Furina, Kazuha, and Silonen for Mono Hydro. Furina provides a damage buff with a burst, which also works especially well with Neuvillette since he also gains and loses HP when he uses his charge attacks and skills, to help Furina charge her fanfare quicker. Furina also increases Neuvillette's max HP with the Hydro Resonance, which further increases his damage. Kazuha and Silonen swirl and crystallize to trigger his passive's damage increase while also providing Hydro Resistance threat and also Hydro damage buff to Neuvillette. Neuvillette's main drawback is similar to Arlecchino and Mavuika, in that his passive increases his charge attack damage, but the highest increase requires at least 3 types of hydro-related reactions being triggered, meaning you will need to preferably pair him with non-hydro-related characters, which would somewhat limit his team comps. His best team includes Furina, however, as the damage buff that Furina provides is able to circumvent this passive's limitations. He also cannot utilize characters like Yelan or Thoma, as he mainly uses charge attacks, so will be unable to activate their bursts. What's more, similar to Arlecchino, Neuvillette has no resistance to interruption at C0, which means it is preferable to give him a shielder. Otherwise, he may get knocked out of his charge attack if you aren't good at dodging. Finally, it is paramount to time his elemental skills and burst right. For example, if you use his skill and charge attack but his burst is not up, it means no source water droplets can be produced. He'll need to resort to a very long charging animation to activate his hydro cannon. This part requires skill and knowledge of its optimal rotations. Ultimately, despite the drawbacks, he's still an amazing hydro DPS that is definitely worth your Primo Gems. Mavuika is the newest released character in 5.3 and is currently the strongest pyro DPS in the game. She's easily able to deal copious amounts of pyro damage with the initial burst damage and the damage from a motorcycle afterwards. The main difference between Mavuika and other pyro DPSs is that she can fully utilize the strong pyro reaction damage, particularly melt and vaporize, especially through her insane damage multipliers on her burst. Using the charge attack on her motorbike still has good multipliers that allow her to consistently dish out high pyro and pyro reaction damage. This may be controversial, but as her burst is the only one in the game that doesn't require energy recharge but rather Night Soul burst and normal attacks, you can almost get her burst up every rotation if you have the right teammates for her, thereby improving her damage output. On top of that, her elemental skill can also be used in tap form, which will summon the Ring of Searing Radiance and deal and apply pyro damage every 2 seconds. Her passive basically allows her to increase the damage of the active team member by a maximum of 40% after she uses the elemental burst if it has maximum fighting stacks. This ultimately also makes her an amazing sub DPS and support depending on what team you slot her in. For the teams that focus on her personal damage, I have 2 options. The first is with Citlali, Silonen, and Bennett. Citlali provides shielding, cryo application, and pyro resistance strat. Silonen buffs pyro and strats pyro resistance, and Bennett buffs Mavuika's attack through his burst and pyro resonance. His C6 also further increases her pyro damage. This team mainly focuses on the huge initial burst damage from Mavuika, as the issue is that Citlali's cryo application doesn't last as long. The second team swaps out Bennett for Furina instead. Furina can apply Hydro and also buff the team's damage even further. This team is for more consistency. Furina's own elemental skill can also deal good damage and allow Mavuika to trigger Vaporize instead after Citlali's cryo application ends. It is still possible to trigger the huge initial melt burst damage, but you need to take note about the frozen reaction, as Claymore characters like Mavuika cannot trigger melt on frozen enemies. So, you may want to wait for a few seconds after the character gets frozen before using her burst. Mavuika's downside is pretty obvious. Her elemental burst charge up is a double-edged sword, in that it can charge up very quickly if you pair her with Natlan characters, especially Silonen and Citlali, but you may suffer from slower charge up times, having to also maybe go for one rotation with Mavuika's elemental skill before you are able to use the elemental burst if you do not have them. However, as we are only halfway through Natlan, there could still be more Natlan characters that can fill these team slots. Or, you can also utilize the free Pyro Traveler and Kachina as supports for Mavuika. However, Mavuika's damage is just too insane, despite the main drawback being her burst charge up. But after you get past that, and get her burst charge up, her damage is so insane, beating out all of the other characters in this list, which is why she's my number 1 DPS character in Genshin Impact. With that, we've come to the end of today's video. What do you think? What is your own top 5 DPSs? Do let me know down in the comment section below. If you have made it this far, do consider leaving a like and subscribing if you haven't, as it would really help out this small channel to get to its next goal of 10,000 subscribers. Thank you so much and see you soon! If you'd like to see which standard banner character is the most worth it to build, please click the video on the right. If you'd like to see my other Genshin Impact videos, please click the playlist on the left. Once again, thank you so much for watching and see you again next time. Bye bye!